You got the distribution call, you got the placement, you did everything right. And somewhere between the purchase order and the shelf, something went sideways. Your product isn't there, or it's there, but it's wrong. Or nobody can tell you either way. Every CPG brand hits this wall. Most of them hit it more than once. I'm Jordan Karcher, founder and CEO of IB. Know Thy Shelf is the show for founders and CPG superstars who are done taking anyone's word for what's happening at the shelf. Real stories, real data, one question underneath all of it. Your product is listed as in stock. Is it though? So let's get into it today. Amanda, you built something that quite literally didn't exist before you made it. Premium non-alcoholic wine that belongs in the wine conversation. But I think what's even more interesting than the product is where it lives in retail right now. And what that reveals about an entire category that's still figuring out the rules. That's what we're getting into today. So before we talk about the product, I'd love to start by talking about your background. You're a BBC journalist. You moved your family to Paris to study wine at Le Cordon Bleu. And then you launched a champagne brand. And in 2019, you pivoted to non-alcoholic wine. I'm extremely curious about pouring their back on champagne for non-alcoholic.
Yeah, it's an interesting one outward in, isn't it? It's also an interesting one from my position. Yeah, I basically was a wine snob, in the sense that I only ever drank wine if it was good. I wasn't rude and outwardly snobby, but I'd be like, "Oh no, thanks, I'll have water." So I was drinking a lot of water, and at wine events also, I wasn't a big alcohol drinker. So if you couple the fact that I was fussy about wine and I didn't want to consume much alcohol, what was I drinking? A ton of sparkling water. And that kind of got me thinking, classic entrepreneur style, well, sparkling water is great, but it's not very celebratory. What is there for when we're celebrating without the alcohol? And it kind of transpired that there was nothing. And apart from in the US, for example, you've got a sparkling fruit juice sort of brand. And there was a few I learned later, kind of legacy non-alcoholic wines that really weren't for wine drinkers. And what I mean by that was they were sort of there for, I guess, old people who had health issues when they were kind of desperate to feel like they had something, but they weren't like choosing them because they were good. So it was this huge white space because as a wine person, I didn't even know non-alcoholic wine existed. So I was like, well, maybe I make that then. And that was when the problem started.
I remember as a kid, my parents would have champagne on New Year's and they would give us sparkling apple cider. I think that
Right.
it was like more of a, you could participate, but it's not wine. It's not produced with the same quality. I'm a wine
No.
person. Love the category, started my career in the wine industry, so it's something I'm very passionate about, but it's really compelling to see the logic of how you jumped from the champagne to a non-alc. What did that production process look like? I mean, obvious.
Well, it was really a bit like ripping up a rule book. I guess, like, if you are a Formula One driver, you technically had to drive a car first. I mean, I was a wine snob who learned how to make great wine with great winemakers, and then I had to kinda go, "Where are the great makers?" And it was sort of tumbleweed. That
Yeah.
being said, there was a great producer of non-alcoholic wine. Germany had a great tradition actually of the de-alcoholization process. So that really lit the fire for me of saying, you're doing the de-alcoholization process well. I wonder if you can make wine to my palate. Because my buzz, my speciality was always palate. So I worked out at wine school that taste palate was my thing. And of course, if you think about any of the drinks industry, I kind of laugh sometimes myself because I'm like, yeah, we love brand, we love marketing, I'm brand obsessed. But I'm always kind of shocked that lots of people don't think that taste
Yeah.
drinks is like the first most important thing. I mean, if you're going to really go all in on a fantastic brand and then your drink sucks, you can probably just sell it once, right?
Absolutely. Well, and I think the interesting thing people at least get a little wrong, in my opinion, about wine or alcohol in general is the flavor profile is supported by the alcohol. So I'm not necessarily drinking wine to get drunk, but the flavor of wine is amazing. Flavor of spirits is amazing. How did you overcome that element of reducing from, let's say, even a low alc 11% champagne to zero and still maintaining a palate that appealed to you? What was that like dialing it in, and how did you really find that happy medium?
Yeah, that was tough. And I think that the reason essentially is to simplify. Most non alcoholic wines are made by cooking, boiling the wine, and then you're not left with anything very sexy at all. And that's the issue. And so the huge challenge was how does one take the alcohol out and retain the vinous or wine like qualities? And that's where I guess the magic happens and the tough work came about. Interestingly, for those who know about wine, there's a really strict tasting process. And of course, alcohol is that key component which gives for non-wine people what we call body, which is kind of the texture, and it's that and what we call mid palate, which is the bit that really hits you in the mouth. And of course, if you haven't got that, then automatically your brain is thinking something's missing. So there were a number of challenges. And actually, the hardest bit was saying, I'm not mimicking. I'm
Okay.
trying to create something really delicious that fits into the wine industry, that doesn't have alcohol, that retains as many wine-like qualities as I can, but isn't the same as. And actually, once I got my head around that as kind of the North Star, I got into a more comfortable position in my headspace because when I talk to wine lovers and I even question myself about my favorite ones, one is not like another. So when I remind people of that, because they're, but is it exactly the same as my favorite red wine? And I'm like, well, what's your favorite red wine? And they get, oh, a California Napa. I said, well, right, let's talk about your California Napa. Sometimes you might have maybe a Pinot from Oregon. Oh, that's not the same, is it? So we all have to get out of our head for that. Is how I remind people one of their favorite wines isn't like another. And then I had to take everybody, including myself, a step further to say, what am I searching for here? Which then becomes a bit esoteric. And that's a whole other podcast.
Great. That's a great perspective. I think I haven't really thought of that myself, but yeah, you're not necessarily competing with an existing wine
Yeah.
as much as making a new varietal.
Yeah. Exactly.
Does it go through the traditional fermentation process?
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's obviously a major character and flavor profile.
Yeah.
And then grapes, are you using any specific types of grapes in the juice, or is it just a standardized? You're using just Pinot, you're using just Chard. Like how is the blending process like? Similar in
Yeah.
traditional fer.
Yeah. In fact, we're making a good wine first. So the whole holistic process of winemaking happens first. That's standalone. And then you're de-alcoholizing it while really trying to retain the wine-like qualities. So actually, you're not making anything easier or cheaper. I think people have made it cheaper because they've cheapened the process with chemicals and sugar. But as I remind wine people, you can buy a lot of cheap, nasty, chemical, sugar-laden wine that's got alcohol in. And of course, the other shocker when people's kind of brain goes, oh, yeah, you're right, is my point about ethanol, alcohol. Actually, that's not the expensive part of wine. And how sadly do poor people get drunk?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So it's also reminding people say, oh, it's got no alcohol. It should be cheaper. I'm like, no, let's just unpack that. So you realize that there's so much that we have just sort of really just taken in the wine business, especially those of us who even know about wine. We just take things as the way they are without unpacking the rationale. So I guess there was a lot of, unpacking of rationale that went on in my head and then having to explain that. And I find now, even in 2026, when I've got this nice success to some degree, I still have to use this overused Gen Z phrase, meet someone where they are. I've now started to understand that that phrase actually makes sense here, which is I could meet someone tomorrow at a tasting and they'll go, I don't even understand the point of that, Amanda. And then I have to really realize that meeting them where they are is actually just taking them completely out of their headspace and saying, if you don't understand the point of it, George, it might not be for you, but let me tell you who it might be for. Millions of wine drinkers like me who just have one or two glasses sometimes, and you're losing revenue to water, and you're losing affiliated revenue if we're at dinner together because it affects the whole table. And then my friend Jordan's not drinking as much beer, and then my friend Saskia isn't ordering dessert, and he's like, and then so it's really a lot of kind of levers you're pulling when you've met someone where they are on that journey of even maybe not even understanding the point and thinking it's still idiocy.
Yeah. That's a really great, and it does expand the pie. It doesn't compete necessarily because I might not. So I had a great dinner the other night in Nashville at Lachlan Table and Naughty Wines by the glass in the
Nice.
menu. And you look at that and you say, yeah, look, you could easily have somebody with you that would have two of those, and I
Yeah.
might be
Yeah.
encouraged to have 2 glasses of wine, and it does expand versus a sparkling water, still water, and trying to drive
Yeah.
margin. your water. So I think that
Exactly. And then hopefully you also sort of get a sense, Jordan, of that emoliation of the experience. There's no crashing kind of oh God, Jordan, I got to be up early for that presentation, or yeah, I'm running a marathon, I got to prepare. You can just order naughty. I mean, I love the fact that everyone makes a big deal about the brand, but lots of people also don't, in the sense that they can just order it and just have a glass of red, and it doesn't, and there's no kind of big deal about drinking. So you emulate that kind of situation as well, which I just think is lovely.
so that's a great maybe segue into the customer profile, or when you're building this, who did you have in mind? Was it for the teetotaler, the zebra striper, someone exploring? Like, how did you think of positioning the brand when you were creating it? Or was it just so kind of new at that time you didn't know and just had the hunch that somebody out there would want it?
No, it's a very key question, actually. I probably took a very different view from a lot of non-alc founders, not to be contra, but because I was the first person in 2019 to create what was perceived as a good non-alcoholic wine. I was making my play to wine drinkers. And for me, that data is incredibly visionary, because if I say to you, I want to take X% of wine industry, but actually I want to take it arguably as an accrual of a flatlining and declining industry, and then I'm taking margin away potentially from water and soft drinks, that's when that starts to become a really interesting data point. Obviously, it's a problematic data point because you're building your own data as you go. But my hunch in 2019, when I launched the first bottle in New York and London, was that my hunch was that there were many wine drinkers like me who were drinking a lot of water, but it wasn't just my hunch, because the data shows that obviously lots of wine drinkers don't just slam up wine all night, because wine drinkers are quite a different profile to beer drinkers and spirit drinkers. Not that there isn't a lot of overlap in Venn diagram, but what was most interesting to me was so much of this data in alcohol is really focused on beer and spirits, because of course, historically, lots of that data came from male gatekeepers in the industry, because even the wine industry historically had men leading it, and still does to an extent, but things are changing. And so it was almost like everybody had forgotten about the wine drinkers, of which there is a large female sort of group, particularly in sparkling wine. And so that was really interesting to me, that idea that there was so much white space, albeit problematic to sort of prove out your hunch on the data, because you're sort of growing it yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, you're kind of in the hometown for champagne drinkers. So being from London, one of the top champagne drinking markets, what was the initial reception like? So when you bring this,
I mean, everybody thought I was insane. People were sometimes quite rude. They were often patronizing. But I grew up in newsrooms as an ex-journalist, TV, radio, as you alluded, in the old days, and I developed quite thick skin. I always think that if you're being patronized or undermined and people think something's a stupid idea, then you're potentially onto something.
absolutely. Uh,
So I sort of had white space for quite a long time. Now in 2026, I was accidentally proved right, and every man and his dog is launching a non-alcoholic wine. But what they don't realize is, one, custom is very hard. One, because the market is still quite nascent, and two, there's a couple of us brands that are quite far ahead. So but did I have to believe in my crazy self? Absolutely, And I think all the best founder stories are like that, aren't they? When you look back on them, like the most stupid ideas ever,
you have to be, yeah,
in
otherwise
quotes.
it's common knowledge. If it's something, all you're doing is fighting out for existing market share and you're battling.
Right. I mean, don't get me wrong. The flip side of that is a huge challenge, because you're constantly building a market that technically didn't exist. I mean, obviously it's an iteration. I've reinvented a wheel of sorts, but there's all manner of nuanced challenges that come with the fact that the very specific layer of category did not exist. So that's the flip side of the challenge for me.
Well, that's maybe another great segue into the next topic, which is the execution, distribution, retail performance. It's a new category. We see it all the time. I see non-alc as its own category. I see non-alc interspersed. I see
Yeah.
non-alc with the beer section, RTDs. It's
Yeah.
spread across a store, multiple buyers.
Yeah.
You can fell through the traditional, at least in the US. I know we have a different model than what you're probably accustomed to in Europe, but in the US, you're going through 3 tier, or you can go with your brand through a traditional, probably food distributor. So that's a lot to navigate. So when you were breaking into the market, you started to think about retail distribution. How did you approach that, supply chain management elements? Were you going, I'm going to work with Southern Breakthrough, I guess RNDC when they still had houses? Were you going that path, or was it much more specific to market and to target customers at those markets?
Well, yeah, and that was a key, obviously, part of the growth journey and remains so. I was lucky enough that I had, even as a Brit, experience of your three-tier system in America because I had sold champagne in America. So because I'd understood that and because I understood the warehouse system and margin and how if I've got bottles in my 3PL warehouse in Kansas, you know, wherever, and they're not selling fast enough, then that, I mean, so I understood the challenges that come with air freight, bottles, margin, 3PL warehouses, getting product to market, a lot of that on a really loose level. And I also understood the lockout contract deals that come with when you're onboarding with one of the really big players for a number of years. And I think, that kind of potential boom or bust situation, not literally, but almost where you could sign your deal and think you've made it with one of the big boys. And then of course, if you're a nascent category and the sales team aren't behind it and your SKU number 3,561, what can you do about that? Right. So I knew I had to control some levers. I also knew there was no playbook. So I had to create my own. So to answer your question, I wanted something that meant I could grow out initially in on premise. Because for me, understanding champagne and fine wine was key to this, which was, while it might not be where I end up making, the mainstay of my revenue, obviously that unsurprisingly will be retail. It's almost more important, I think, with the brand. It is more important because otherwise, how do you get pull through? You need to be available and poured and part of people's lifestyle when they're popping out to bars, restaurants, neighborhood places. They want to talk about you, see you. So that was the first play, really. And of course, to get a by the glass deal with something that doesn't exist really and doesn't make sense really, and meeting people where they are, which might be like, what's the point of that? That's a real, I guess, what we call now in the fashionable circles, which thankfully has come around, a real sort of community, one conversation at a time piece, which I still adhere to actually, which is interesting. I held my nerve. Yeah. So it was really during, obviously, remember I launched in 2019. So 20 was the pandemic. So everybody was online. So I was the only Brit and the only wine specialist on the board of at the original AMBER, the Non-Alcoholic Beverage Association. So, we were sort of having lots of conversations, all of the non-alcoholic founders, and how was the category going to develop. And it was really all about, at that time in non-alcoholic, it was all about beer, very much so, which now is a very mature category, of course. And it was all about non-alcoholic spirits, which was not a mature category, but which was way ahead of mine, because I was kind of the first person to say, I've got a good non-alcoholic wine. So there were a lot of things to play for and a lot of decisions to make. But the main thing I was focused on was that sort of availability piece of really buying into that sort of alcohol 3-tier system so we could get a play with those fine dining bars, restaurants, Michelin stars, and then also keep some flexibility around brokerage and those retail deals. And actually, going back to 2026 and what I know now about American retail is that there is no standard playbook anyway in in the sort of retail pipeline, and then bring in non-alcoholic wine, and then you're in a whole other gray area because there are different entry points like you alluded to. Are we coming in through the wine buyer? Are we coming in through a non-alcoholic buyer? Are we coming in through soft drinks? And that's no surprise to me because I've seen exactly the same play out in London. And so we're still in that sort of space where it is a very gray area. And of course, also the challenge there is when they're benchmarking your rate of sale, how are they going to benchmark you when you didn't have that historical data? So there were challenges every which way, but I knew I needed to have flexibility on my levers so that if one deal didn't work the way I wanted it to work, it didn't just die, but I could pivot So it was just making sure I didn't lock myself out in any drastic way so that I couldn't make something work. Because usually with American retailers, we say to them, which is your preferred route to market? And of course, often, because you'll think people might not know, but you have to reverse engineer the deal almost and say, if Joe Blogs wants me to go through X broker, then I have to persuade X broker to take me on. Then so I've been shocked at how different every single retailer is in America. I mean, quite literally. I would argue actually much more different than the retailers in London. The retailers in the UK, I would say, are a lot more standardized with their process and system. I would argue that every retail deal I've either won or am in talks with in America has a different entry point and system.
And so have you had examples where you walk into a meeting, assuming you're talking to a certain buyer or a certain category manager, and it was the exact wrong person? And how does that play out in that?
All the time, yeah. So all the time. And of course, the other challenge you have constantly, I'm sure your watchers, viewers, and listeners are aware of, is that buyers move all the time and they're going to have their own preferences. So, like, you could be the buyer and I've got on well with you and you love naughty, and then the buyer changes and they want to do a whole reset. I mean, welcome to the world of retail, right? So, yeah, buyers come in and out. Some stay for 20 years, some stay for 2, 3. There's no rule book.
Would you treat that as a relationship driven approach, or because of the uncertainty, do you view it much more about executing at the store level customer acquisition? So how do you play that out knowing a buyer could be there 20 years or 20 weeks?
I mean, initially, they're the gatekeepers, so your relationship is key. And I think what I've also learned is I've built some great relationships with some buyers who've moved on from said retailer and I've managed to keep a relationship with. And actually, I've got a call with one tomorrow night, a big player, about a challenge I've got. So I think I am a person who builds relationships and doesn't always want things back. And I guess that's the community feel. So I think that pays dividends for me. I just like people generally, and I like learning. And so I think it's not everyone's style to like my style, of course. Not everyone's going to love my style, but I just do my best to recognize that people have worked long and hard to get into their position, and I just need to play by their rules. But hopefully we'll get along, and then hopefully in the sort of network we'll stay in touch. And actually, that's an interesting point, really. I've been surprised in a good way as to how the world is huge in terms of literal population. And obviously, each state is huge in America. But of course, actually, even though we're online a lot, I feel like the spider's web of networks of people who remember when I did something 3 years ago, or they recognize naughty now, go, oh, yeah, now's the time. Or so I think sometimes, especially younger people, probably because they're not used to the old school relationships that we all used to have to build in front of people, don't realize that you need to treat online like the real world. And I think sometimes when I'm mentoring young people, they're surprised and I say, LinkedIn is like the real world. If I'm going to send out 20 messages asking for stuff, I'm going to get tumbleweed, right? It's like if I called up 20 people I didn't know and asked for stuff, and they're like, what do you mean? I say, well, and that's why I guess I've kept decent relationships. And even when there's been problems, people are usually happy to jump on a call with me because I treat everybody with respect, whatever their position, I suppose.
And I think that's something that leads right into my next question, which we talked about initially when brands come into this sector, and it seems like they have a lot of money and they raise a bunch of capital, and they have a nice brand, nice idea, but they disappear just as fast. When that happens, is it something more where they just had a lot of ability to push the product out and then no retail strategy? Is it failure of product market fit? Is it execution? Like when you see those happen, and you've been now 7 years at this, so you've kind of built up a much stronger foundation. What do you view as some of the symptoms or causes of those quick blow
I
up?
mean, we could do a list as long as my arm. I think that outside the industry, people don't realize how hard it is to build a CPG brand, get into drinks brands, and I mean, it's just so hard. I'm not complaining. I'm just stating a fact. And then And then right, exactly. And then bring in retail and what they need and want, and bring in a macroeconomic climate that's uncertain, and bring in a war, bring in oil pricing, bring in shipping issues, bring in everything, cost of living. It's all really, really hard. So going back to your question, more micro, probably each person's story is very different. But I think that I guess the thing that money and failure of some brands, because each time a brand fails, it's obviously for each of us founders, it's not a helpful situation because, it's sad often, especially if there's real founders and real people who've really worked hard on it. But I think that if people think that just throwing big money around is going to create a brand, then that's definitely going to fail. Going back to my idea of community, which has been tough to execute at times when I've become incredibly envious online of other brands that I know, because our model was to not take big private equity VC, was to scale as sustainably as we could, was to stay profitable and use that for marketing. That was the playbook that wasn't fashionable. Then, of course, everything's changed and now it is. But it's been really hard for me along the way, and continues to be hard to make decisions because I just don't have money just to throw around. And so, yeah, I mean, there's already in the non-alcoholic wine world, even if you, not just non-alcoholic world, the wine world, there's already a whole litany of failures, or whatever we call them, when they succeeded then failed. Obviously you still tried and you shouldn't be seen as a failure. But yes, so behind the scenes a lot of brands are struggling even today. It's hard, it's tough, right? And I think that there's no magic. I mean, I think the magic is unfortunately the least sexy thing ever, which is trying to be a good person and hard work.
That's it. No one likes hard work. I would say patience, hard work, consistency.
Yeah.
A lot of
Okay.
times, survival. Just don't die. That's
Right.
old people always they throw in the towel too early, and it's like if you could just survive.
I know, because you've just hit on that really interesting. I had this conversation with another founder the other day, because we all know it as founders, we all feel it. It's just that moment that, and as founders, it's never once. It's those moments when you're like, this is a freaking disaster. And it's those moments when it's all going absolutely the wrong way. You've had quite enough. You wake up and you want to press pause. I always say, if I could create a founder button where we would wake up and press pause just for a little while, so nothing would move in our business, we just pause it. Can you imagine? I mean, that's utopia for founders, right? We just pause, because we never can do that. It's like, if we can just get into our head and get used to that, this is the time when it's going to turn around, and it always does. And I'm not religious, I'm not spiritual, I kind of believe in karma because that's like a good person thing, like don't be an asshole. You know but I think it always happens, that, doesn't it? If you just dig deep mentally, hang in there, then something drops in your lap.
Does time, communication. I think just the general network effect of your own world. The more you're out there and putting yourself out there, the more
Exactly.
back. You just don't know when. You never know how long it takes. And I always tell people it's maybe the next day, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month, but you got to wake up every day and assume that it's that day. And if you can do that enough days in a row, it does happen. And you get to
Yeah.
made it. I had the exit. I did the things, but no one ever tells you it's not actually fun along the way. It's
There are moments, aren't there? I mean, and then all the sort of the Gen Z founders are all out there just putting all their messy bits online, and I'm like, oh, well, good for you. But yeah, I mean, for a lot of us, that'll be a whole other content piece, wouldn't it? I mean, that's a different business, right?
Oh, it's just that's why it's funny when you mentioned when you said you wake up and press pause. I was like, at least you went to sleep that night. If you could sleep, that's a fine. Like you
Do you
got some.
know, that is my superpower. I am sleep obsessed. I know Ariana Huffington said it first. Literally sleep obsessed. I mean, even my travel routine, because I'm on planes a lot. I know it's not great ethically greens. I try to offset, but I have to be in the room sometimes. And I just have my really nerdy routines, and sleep's my superpower. I'm obsessed with it.
This has been such a fun conversation, and could talk all day about wine and the story and your experiences. So, one question I do love to ask everybody by the end is if a founder comes to you today, doesn't have to be in the same sector, just in the space, and says, "Hey, I'm thinking about launching a brand. I'm about to launch this brand. I'm trying to get into retail. What type of advice would you give them? Anything that you think of now, good, bad, it could be don't go,
Yeah.
turn around, do something else.
I would say be prepared for a long ride, be prepared for a rocky ride, be prepared that just because you've done one retail playbook, don't be naive and think it'll be like another because it won't. I would say once you've got the ink dry, then the impossibly hard work begins because your podcast is brilliant at sharing this. And I wish I had this a longer time ago, but your reminders that you do the deal, then you've got to make sure it's on the shelf, right? And that whole merchandising piece is a whole other level. So I would say, why not do fintech? I really I laugh at myself now. I'm like, God, you idiot, Amanda. If you'd have done tech, you'd have been worth billions by now. I literally would have done.
It's wine's more fun. I have a winery. It's a very bad world. I just want to own the wine. I just don't want to have to make money on the wineries. I want the winery. I think that's always the goal. And then that's a great point, and it's very true. But I think anything in this space requires a ton of passion, and you obviously have that. No matter what happens, if you care about the product, you care about the customer, and you're ready to grind it out, I think it's a solvable.
Yeah, yeah, and that goes back to my overriding philosophy, which is brand. You can sell anything once if you're a smart brand builder. You've got to keep those customers coming back. How are you going to keep them coming back, right? And actually, I think my buzzword on that is trust. And trust is lost every which way in this world. And I think at my core, that's my kind of obsession is that customer trust piece.
That's great, and that's what you need, and I think customers can tell, and that's why they come back and they continue to expand, and when you launch any new SKUs, if and when you add to the portfolio, you have an audience waiting and ready to support you, and, I think that's the most important part of building a CPG business, so I wish you nothing but the best. I hope to continue seeing Naughty expand rapidly throughout the state. I know I can grab it around the corner at my favorite local restaurant, so I'm always happy about that.
I love that.
Us has a chance to try the product. I really greatly appreciate you being on today. And for anyone listening, if any of these stories sound familiar or you're running into similar issues about getting visibility on the shelf, you just picked up new distribution, you're not sure where to start, please visit us at shopwitheileen.com. We'll be happy to give you quick insights, give you visibility, and give you 10 stores for free. And as always, know thy shelf.